This is scary secret about blacks in Africa. I swear to God you never carefully heard this. You won't believe what they hide. Let's start. Despite all I'd read about Africa, my first impressions upon being there were overwhelming. As I walked the streets of Windhoek, the capital of newly independent Namibia, I saw black Herero people in black Ovambo. I saw Nama, a group quite unlike the blacks in appearance. I saw whites, descendants of recent European immigrants, and outside Windhoek I saw the last of the formerly widespread Kalahari Bushmen struggling for survival. These people were no longer pictures in a textbook, they were living humans, right in front of me. But what most surprised me was a street sign on one of downtown Windhoek's main roads. It read Goering Street. Surely, I thought, no country could be so dominated by unrepentant Nazis that it would name a street after Hermann Goering, the notorious head of the Luftwaffe. As it turned out, the street actually commemorates Hermann's father, Heinrich, founding Reichskommissar of the German colony of Southwest Africa, which would later be renamed Namibia. But Heinrich is no less a problematic figure than his son. His legacy includes one of the most vicious attacks ever carried out by European colonists on Africans, Germany's 1904 War of Extermination against the Herero. Today, while events in neighboring South Africa command the world's attention, Namibia, too, struggles to deal with its colonial history and establish a multiracial society. Namibia illustrated for me how inseparable Africa's past is from its present. Most Americans think of native Africans as black and of white Africans as recent intruders, and when they think of Africa's racial history they think of European colonialism and slave trading. But very different types of peoples occupied much of Africa until as recently as a few thousand years ago. Even before the arrival of white colonialists, the continent harbored 5 of what many consider to be the world's 6 major divisions of humanity, the so-called human races, 3 of which are native to Africa. To this day nearly 30% of the world's languages are spoken only in Africa. No other continent even approaches this human diversity, and no other continent can rival Africa in the complexity of its human past. Been moving back and forth between Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. But the puzzling placements of blacks, pygmies, and Khoisan hint at past population upheavals. Today there are just 200,000 pygmies scattered amid 120 million blacks. This fragmentation suggests that pygmy hunters lived throughout the equatorial forests until they were displaced and isolated into small groups by the arrival of black farmers. Similarly, the Khoisan area of southern Africa is surprisingly small for a people so distinct in anatomy and language. Could the Khoisan as well have been originally more widespread until their more northerly populations were somehow eliminated? Perhaps the greatest puzzle, however, involves the island of Madagascar, which lies just 250 miles off the coast of southeastern Africa, much closer to Africa than to any other continent. It's in Madagascar that the 5th African race is found. Madagascar's people proved to be a mixture of 2 elements, African blacks and, surprisingly, given the separation seemingly dictated by the whole expanse of the Indian Ocean, Southeast Asians, specifically Indonesians. As it happens, the language of the Malagasy people is very close to the Manyam language spoken on the Indonesian island of Borneo, over 4,000 miles away. No one even remotely resembling the Borneans lives within thousands of miles of Madagascar. Between 9,000 and 4,000 BC the Sahara was more humid, there were numerous lakes. And the desert teemed with game. The Saharans tended cattle and made pottery, then began to keep sheep and goats. They may even have started to domesticate sorghum and millet. This Saharan pastoralism began well before food production got its start in Egypt, in 5200 BC, when a full package of Western Asian winter crops and livestock arrived. Farming then spread to West Africa and Ethiopia. By around 2500 BC cattle herders had already crossed the modern border of Ethiopia into northern Kenya. Linguistics offers another way to date the arrival of crops, by comparing words for crops in related modern languages that diverged from each other at various times in the past. It thus becomes clear, for instance, that the people who were domesticating sorghum and millet in the Sahara thousands of years ago spoke languages ancestral to modern Nilo-Saharan languages. Similarly, the people who first domesticated the wet country crops of West Africa spoke languages ancestral to the modern Niger-Congo languages. The people who spoke ancestral Afro-Asiatic languages were certainly involved in the introduction of Middle Eastern crops into North Africa and may have been responsible for the domestication of crops native to Ethiopia. Analyzing the names of crops leaves us with evidence that there were at least 3 ancestral languages spoken in Africa thousands of years ago: ancestral Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, and Afro-Asiatic. And other linguistic evidence points to an ancestral Khoisan language. That evidence, however, doesn't come from crop names, since the ancestral Khoisan people didn't domesticate any crops. Surely, since Africa harbors 1,500 languages today, it was big enough to harbor more than 4 ancestral languages in the past. But all those other languages must have disappeared, either because the people speaking them lost their original languages, as the Pygmies did, or because the peoples themselves disappeared.